Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 3 or week 2.5 of the Latin American social movements. I'm super excited about this lesson today because I think it's a really cool way to finish off the year and to learn about these really incredible women. This will be our last week of content, as I said in my history learning plan. And next week we will introduce the final. So I hope that you enjoy this. I'm really excited to teach it to you. Also, yes, I did put on another headband and I brushed my hair. Does it matter that I'm still wearing my pajamas? You can't see that. I also did go into work today and to start cleaning up my classroom, which was really sad. But it was also really messy. So it really just made me think of you guys. But yeah, so that is that. And we are going to move on. I'm going to take myself off the screen and we're going to go right into the do now. If we were in class, the do now would be a recap of the day before. So let's pretend that you watched Ms. Pearson's video yesterday and this is fresh in your mind. And if it's not, you may want to go back and just look at your answers for your old ed puzzle. So, what were some of the issues that led to the Zapatista movement? And then, what were some results of their activism? So, take a moment in ed puzzle and just respond to these questions. It will just be in one box, so you can number it 1 and 2. Okay, so our agenda. Now, I am going to make one big ed puzzle for 2 days worth of content. And what I mean by that is that I've broken up the lecture into 2 days. You can do it all in one sitting, or you could take a break between the two. Oh, the joys of online learning. So, day 1, that is the historical context that led to the Chilean women's protest. And day 2 is the methods of resistance and evaluation of resistance methods. So this is exactly as Ms. Pearson structured hers. And my guess is, even though we haven't fully created it, your final is going to look something like this: researching historical context, researching methods of resistance, and then evaluating whether or not their resistance methods were successful. Cool. So let's do this. So as we know, the unit has 2 essential questions. The first is, how does historical context shape activism? And then the second is, to what extent are social movements successful? For day 1, we're going to focus on the first question. Yay! So what's our objective? You're going to be able to identify, just be able to list them out, the historical injustices that paved the way for the current women's protests in Chile. Excuse me. And when I say current, I mean this protest happened in November of 2019. So here we go. Welcome to class. Welcome to day 1, historical context. So Ms. Pearson made this awesome timeline. You might want to take a look at some of the other social movements that occurred throughout Latin America as something that you may want to eventually research on your own. Today, we're going to take a look at women's activism in 2019 to protest gender inequity, discrimination, and violence. Before I tell you anything else, I'm going to show you a video. And I want you to maybe write it on a separate document, maybe write it on a piece of paper, but I want you to answer these questions. When the video is done, you can then put your answers into Edpuzzle. Where does this protest take place? What are the women protesting against? Choose one lyric or one action of the song and dance and explain its symbolism. And if it's a little confusing about the symbolism, don't worry, I'll explain that later. And I want you to answer what happened after this video came out. Okay, enjoy. This is so awesome. I can't even tell you. I've listened to this and watched this multiple times.
El patriarcado es un juez que nos juzga por nacer y nuestro castigo es la violencia que no ves. El patriarcado es un juez que nos juzga por nacer y nuestro castigo es la violencia que ya ves. Es femicidio. Impunidad para el asesino. Es la desaparición. Es la violación. Y la culpa no era mía, ni dónde estaba, ni cómo Y la culpa no era mía, ni dónde estaba, ni cómo vestía. Y la culpa no era mía, ni dónde estaba, ni cómo vestía. Y la culpa no era mía, ni dónde estaba, ni cómo vestía. Ni loco, la culpa se le pagó, ni me pagan, ni loco. Y la culpa no era mía, ni dónde estaba, ni cómo vestía. Y la culpa no era mía, ni dónde estaba, ni cómo vestía. El violador es tú. El presidente. Opresor es un macho violador. El Estado opresor es un macho violador. El Estado opresor es un macho violador. El violador es tú.
So, a lot to unpack there. Let's take a moment to answer those questions. Great. So, where does this protest take place? Let's start with that one. This protest takes place in Chile. What are the women protesting against? We're going to learn more about this, but they're predominantly protesting sexual violence against women and the inactions of the government, the police officers, the local judges. I'm looking forward to reading your responses on the lyric or the song and dance and explaining its symbolism. And what happened after the video came out? It went viral. So let's take a look at the historical context. How did we get to where we are today? How did that video come to be? So, first, let's take a look at where Chile is located on a map. As you can see here, Chile is located in South America. It's actually deceivingly quite far from San Francisco, over 12 hours on an airplane. Santiago, you see, is the capital, and where the protest took place was in Valparaiso, which is very close to the capital of Santiago. So, some historical context. On a very large scale, we need to look at the systematic failures. When I say systematic failures, I mean the systems, the governments, the police officers, the judges, the institutions, the legal system, the political system that have failed to act against sexual violence against women in Chile for years. So before I even go back in time, I want to give you some statistics. According to the Chilean Network of Violence Against Women, there are 42 cases of sexual abuse against women reported daily. That's about 2 per hour. And that doesn't count for the ones that are not reported. Only a quarter of those ever make it to a court hearing, to a judicial ruling, to a judge saying that the perpetrator is either guilty or not. Only 25% of those cases ever make it to a court and receive a hearing or a ruling, excuse me. Another statistic that's quite sad is 1 woman is killed by a man each week. Over the course of their lifetime, a third of Chilean women are sexually assaulted. When I looked up the number of Chilean women and did the math, 1/3 is approximately 3.1 million women are sexually assaulted in Chile. On a different level, women are also paid 30% less than men. They are discriminated against by the healthcare system in the possibility that they become pregnant. It is also very difficult for women to get abortions in Chile. So let's go back in time a little bit. First, we want to look at the dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet. He was the dictator in Chile from 1973 to 1990. Thousands of people were killed and tortured under his regime. 40,000 people were believed to be victims of the dictatorship, 3,000 were killed, and 3,400 women reported sexual torture, and 300 were raped. To this day, the Chilean government is still very slow to criminalize, to punish sexual violence. Fun fact, Augusto Pinochet was a capitalist, not a communist, and therefore he was backed and supported by the United States. As we know from our study of South Africa, the United States has a pretty bad history in supporting leaders and governments that treat their people quite poorly, but support capitalist ideals. You'll learn more about that next year. The belief was, and in many circles in Chile still is, that women belong in the home and not in the workforce. They had a lot of lack of rights in marriage. Women weren't even allowed to divorce until the early 2000s, nor were they given the right to vote until 1942, which is slightly before this. But women's protesting is not a new thing in Chile. In the 1980s, there was a rallying cry that the women used, democracy in the streets and in the houses. And the women would protest these patriarchal systems with men at the top and the government in the 1980s. What I think is really cool is this print, the stitching right here. This is known, and excuse my Spanish, an arpillera, which is a stitching. And the women would stitch this with the help of the Catholic Church, they would send these stitchings out to other countries to show how bad the violence was. And you might be saying, well, this doesn't look so bad. It's not. This is one of the more uplifting stitchings that they created. Many of the other stitchings showed women chaining themselves to government halls, chaining themselves to each other, or escaping gunfire. And again, they would sell these or send them out to other countries so they could see how bad the violence was. I decided to choose a more uplifting one just to show how beautiful they are and to show a form of resistance that was happening early on. Making sure I got everything here. I think I did. Moving on, we're going to fast forward until last March, March 2019. There was a Chilean feminist strike. It was one of the largest strikes in Chilean history since they transitioned to democracy in 1990. So, in the past 20, 30 years. What were they protesting? Violence against women, discrimination against lesbians and transgender people, the right to reproductive health, that means better access to abortion clinics, and housing rights. Approximately 350,000 people came out to protest. Most were women, but many brought their male partners and their children. The scene from the day was joyous, but it was also pretty forceful as well. So, as I explained, feminist protests are not a new idea in this country. There was a lot of protesting that took place in the 1980s, just like I explained before. However, feminist protests and protests in general often struggle to represent all the voices that they want to. So in the past with strikes, they had a hard time incorporating multiple voices and people from different backgrounds. So in this one, they tried to include more migrant women, more older and younger women, and women from trade sectors. On a side note, and you don't need to know this, but what's interesting is that the Women's March in the United States um, has also has a bit of controversy in that it has been argued that the founders or that the people that participated made it a white feminist march and it did not represent the histories and the narratives and the struggles of women of color. So it oftentimes women's marches, and again marches in general, fail to include a variety of voices. However, this march really did try to include more and more women. However, there are still prominent beliefs among government officials, as Chile is a very conservative country, that women should be Catholic, nationalists, and housewives. As you can see from the picture on the side, these women have red like handprints over their mouths. That is supposed to symbolize missing or violated women. You could also see that they're holding a sign that says, No estamos todas, faltan las muertas. And that means this is not all of us. This is not all of us women. We are missing those who have died. And if I got that wrong, somebody let me know. Fast forward about 7 months later to October 2019. Chile is a very stable country. However, among the wealthiest countries in the world, to which the United States is a part of, as is Chile, they have the greatest income inequality. Okay? So, what happened? Well, the government decided to raise the metro fares. And as we can see from this picture, which is actually a video, we have students who are protesting by completely destroying the metro stations. So, what happened? The government raised the metro fares. This led to mass protests about income inequality, wage gaps between men and women, and lack of educational opportunities in healthcare. I don't think I said this, but women earn about 30% less than men. But what happened afterwards is actually quite sad. There was a lot of violence against the protesters. The police officers, the military kidnapped, tortured, and sexually abused people, in particular women. Sexual abuse against women made up 15% of the complaints within the first 40 days. And this wasn't 20, 30 years ago. This was 3 or 4 months ago. And as we can see in the song, the lack of government response to the violence that occurred after these protests in October is a big theme. So this protest happened in October 2019, and that dance we saw at the beginning happened 1 month later. So let's watch this video of the October protests.
Ya se ha alargado mucho. Al principio ya es tolerable, pero ya lamentablemente ya se ha masificado mucho. Los estudiantes cuando entran de golpe están haciendo una protesta que muchas personas que trabajamos no podemos dar. Entonces de alguna manera resulta representativa.
Bueno, igual bueno que los jóvenes salgan a protestar porque subieron el pasaje, porque igual en vez de subir los sueldos están subiendo.
So you can see this is complicated. They would prefer, obviously, that they raise salaries to decrease that income inequality, but instead they raise the metro fares. But also people that worked at the metro stop were not very happy that these students destroyed it. So let's keep going. So how did we get to 1 month later? Well, I wanted to bring in a quote from the executive director at Amnesty International. Amnesty International is an international organization that brings to light injustices and human rights abuses all around the world. So let's see what she had to say as a result of these protests. Who wants to read? Bueller? Okay, I'll read. Are you so still loving hearing my voice? It is frightening that in the course of just a few days, more than 20 people have lost their lives, including 5 thought to be at the hands of state agents. On the top of this terrible tally, hundreds have suffered permanent injuries in just a few weeks, such as the loss of an eye after being hit by rubber bullets or tear gas canisters. We also have documented cases of torture and sexual violence. How can the Chilean government play down the seriousness of these events, which continue happening daily? It should take urgent measures to stop this. The Chilean president did nothing about this. And so the violence continued for another couple of weeks, which then will lead us to that awesome song and dance. So I want you to stop and again answer these questions. What are past injustices that led to the Chilean women's protests in November? I gave you 3. I would love for you to summarize those 3 injustices that led to the November protests. And in your opinion, which injustice do you think had the greatest influence on the current movement? When I say current movement, I mean that dance we watched at the beginning. Which had the greatest influence? And if you can't choose one, talk about how they all work together to lead to that awesome dance we saw. So as a recap, let's look at the issues that fueled activism. Number 1, there is a long history of sexual violence and workplace discrimination against women. Some of that violence happened under Pinochet, the dictator, and some of it happened long before. There was a feminist protest in March of 2019 that highlighted various issues from violence against women to the gender pay gap to reproductive rights. That took us to the extreme violence against protesters in October 2019. And one of the reasons why the women created the song was in response to the lack of government response to the violence against the protesters in October 2019. I would argue that this right here, the October 2019, that was the spark. But again, violence against women is not new, and it's been something that women have been protesting for 30 years, if not longer. Okay, if you want to take a break, now would be a good time to do that. Day 2 will be methods of resistance and success of resistance. Okay, welcome back to day 2. Here we go. Today's objective will be I will be able to explain which methods of resistance were used and how they connect to the historical trends, and I'll be able to evaluate the success of the current women's protest in Chile. So that's our goal for today. So, what were these methods of resistance? Well, you probably already know, but let's take a look. Number 1, they organized a protest with a choreographed song and dance. So, you see here thousands of women who came out. They had similar outfits, they had a dance, they had a song. And what did they do after this song and dance? Well, they posted it on social media. So, if we think back to the historic trends that this connects to, when you're protesting using a song and a dance for more rights, that connects to those transitions to democracy in the 80s and 90s in other Latin American countries. You are using a way to express yourself. They're not going out to vote, but they are using one of their rights, which is to protest, to show that they want more freedoms, less violence. And when they posted a video on social media that later went viral, that's an example of globalization and one of the benefits of globalization, in that because of social media, because of the internet, these women were able to bring to light all of the issues that have existed in Chile for many, many years. Here's a screenshot of their social media page on Instagram. The group that created this dance was known as Las Tesis. And you can see here on the next page, this is one of my most beautiful slides that I've ever made. These are screenshots of their social media page. So I'm going to throw them an at. Is that an at? Do you say that? Throw them a like? I don't know, guys. I need help. You want to follow them on Instagram. There's their Instagram page. Just throw them in, slide into their DMs. How about that? Oh, I could see you all rolling your eyes at me. So lame. Anyway, on their social media page, you can see them practicing for the dance. You could see them actually doing the dance. I just think some of the ways in which they've designed their page are super cool. It kind of tells them where to meet and when to practice. It reminds me a lot of the social media that came out right around the Arab Spring. So I thought that was super cool. And yeah, definitely look them up on Instagram. They haven't posted in a while, but still cool. So what is El Violador del Camino? Well, as the video said, it means a rapist in your path. It's based off the work of a woman named Rita Segato, who argues that sexual violence is a political problem, not a social one. What does that mean, political problem? When we think of politics, I think of the local officials, the police officers, the judges, or I think of it more on a national level, like our president. Sexual violence is a political problem, not a social one. This means that the police officers, the judges, the local and national officials are responsible for systematically violating women's rights. They could be the ones committing the acts of sexual violence, or, and in my opinion, just as pernicious, just as dangerous, they don't do anything about it. So maybe they don't commit the acts of violence, but they turn their head the other way when it happens. When I say it's not a social problem, I mean it's not the fault of the women. Women are often blamed for being the victims when they are not at fault. And part of that song talks about we can wear, we can dress, we can act how we want. It is not our fault. We are free to be who we are. So you can see here the women are pointing in the song, and I want you to think about who they might be pointing to. You can also see here that they are pointing again but they're wearing these black like bandanas or blindfolds over their eyes. Think about what that might symbolize. Great. So happy that you thought about that. Excuse me. What is the symbolism that exists in El Violador del Camino? So we see that the women squat 3 times in the video. And you can see here, this is the best picture I can get. This is the humiliating position women are forced to take when arrested. I know the video talked about this a little. I just wanted to recap because I thought it was fascinating, all that went into this. They're pointing. Who are they pointing at? Police officers, the courthouses, any institution that is perpetuating the violence by committing it or by ignoring it. We talked about this already, but the red handprint over the mouth represents the missing or the violated women. You can see here the pañuelos, or the green scars. Those are the campaign for legal abortion. And that blindfold we were talking about, so you can see it back here in this woman, these are to represent the invisible ways in which the government allows violence, gender-based violence, to occur. You could probably think of some other acts of symbolism that were in this video as well. So was it successful? You're going to have to sort of evaluate that on your own. Unlike in the revolutions where we gave you the markers of success, we want to take it a step further. You guys are a year and a half older now. We want you to evaluate the success on your own. But first, I want to show you their goals and then what happened. And you can then evaluate, did they meet their goals? So we're moving on to the second essential question was, to what extent are social movements successful? And there's a little asterisk next to successful because as Ms. Pearson said, success can be defined differently for different people and in different contexts. So this is so cool. You're going to stop right now and you're going to have to open a new tab in your computer and you're going to listen to an interview by Camila Osorio. She's a reporter for The New Yorker. She went down to the protest and she explained what happens next. So you're going to go to that bit.ly that I created, bit.ly, Women Rule the World. Love it. And listen to the interview. When you're done, you want to answer those questions. It's really good. It's only about 6 or 7 minutes. And again, you could just plop all those answers into one box on Edpuzzle. All right, go enjoy. So was it successful? So let's look at their initial goals. One of their goals was to bring attention to the widespread nature of sexual violence against women in Chile. They wanted to hold the local, state, and national government officials accountable for their violent behavior and or their gross inaction. When I say gross inaction, I mean that the president didn't come out after the violence against women in October to do anything about it. That when they report the cases of sexual violence against women, only 25% of those make it to the courts. In my opinion, this makes them accomplices. It makes them complicit or agreeing with the behavior of those committing acts of violence. And I really do think that they wanted to bring to light, to highlight the long-standing issues of institutional discrimination, the fact that women get paid so much less than men, the fact that women, under Pinochet and even now are believed that their place belongs in the home, and cruelty towards women. They wanted to bring that to light to show that this is not a new issue in this country. So what were the outcomes? Well, the video went viral. It was recreated 367 times in 52 countries and on every continent but Antarctica. It was even translated into sign language. Where did it show up? Well, in the United States, it was used with the Me Too movement. Many of you know about Me Too and about Harvey Weinstein. The women used this dance outside one of Harvey Weinstein's trials, and it was so loud they heard it on the 15th floor of the courthouse. In Turkey, they used it to focus on femicide, which is the killing of women based on their gender, because 440 women were killed by men last year. And unfortunately, gendered violence is common across all cultures. It is not unique to Chile or the US or to Turkey. So the message resonates. It builds solidarity among women, among transgender people, among men, among anybody that continues to be an ally for women who are experiencing sexual violence. It also brings awareness to an issue that is often overlooked and underpunished. The people that commit these crimes are not held accountable, and unfortunately, the people that the crimes are happening to are blamed. And that is not fair, but it is very widespread. Here's a map to show all the different places around the world where this dance was recreated. And again, it was switched up a little bit depending on where you went, but this is all the places it was recreated. Super cool. So, some other outcomes. The president did pass what was known as Gabriella's Law in March 2020, so pretty recently. Um, President Piñera signed the law that set penalties for femicide. Femicide is killing women because of her gender, and you could be sentenced up to from 15 years to life in prison. And it can include sexual violence, economic violence, institutional, political, and workplace violence. I'm going to switch to the next slide because I forgot to delete this one. So we're going to go right here. Pineda later said, sometimes it's not just the men that want to commit abuse, but also the women put themselves in a position where they are abused. So yes, Gabriella's Law was put into place. It was named after a woman who was killed by her boyfriend in 2008. But then Pineda later came out to say this. So even though he passed the law, it's hard to tell if his thoughts and feelings have changed. It's still very hard to get an abortion in Chile, and there is rampant violence against the LGBTQ plus community. So this is also super cool. There was also another women's march in 2020. And these pictures are from a friend of mine's cousin who was actually there at these protests. And according to my friend who's Chilean, millions of people came out to protest. So the quality of this is not as great, but this is taken from my friend's cousin's iPhone in Chile. And here is a video from her iPhone documenting the protest just 2 months ago or 5 years ago, depending on how you're measuring time these days. So I thought these were really cool. I thought it was really cool that my friend's cousin was involved, and she still is involved. But of course, a lot of this has taken a back seat because of the virus. But this march did come couple months after the dance originally came out. All right. So the last part of this lecture and of this unit is going to be your stance. With the initial outcomes in mind, even though it's just a few months in, you're now going to evaluate whether or not the Chilean women's activism was effective in meeting its goal. I want you to pick one of their goals. I've listed them here. And I want you to take a stance. Do you think they were effective in achieving it? Why or why not? Draw from one example from the lecture to support your answer. I look forward to reading these answers. Again, this is going to be something that you're going to need to do for your final, so I'm looking forward to seeing it. Thank you for listening, for staying with me. I really hope this recorded. I never really know. Oh, yeah. All right. Looks like at 33 minutes. I forgot how tiring teaching was. I still miss you guys every day. Talk to you later.